So it's 12:05 now, and I'd like to go ahead and just to put a disclaimer out that we will be recording today's session, and we will be distributing the recording for anyone who's would like to review it again after the fact. I would ask that if you could please post any questions you have through the presentation into the chat. My teammate Brian Jackson is with me today, and he'll be monitoring the chat. We do have a dedicated Q&A period at the end of today's session in which we will be able to address all of those questions for you. And if you have anything privately that you'd like to ask, please feel free to send a direct message. So with that, I'd like to start by first and foremost welcoming everyone today. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us over your lunch hour. And we have a couple folks from the West Coast as well, so welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about leveraging AI to boost the community impact of your various organizations. And to start and kick things off, we'd like to acknowledge and thank the traditional knowledge keepers, past, present, and future, of the Treaty 8 lands as we turn around, and the region of Wood Buffalo is located on Treaty 8 lands of the traditional lands, of the Cree, Dene, and the unceded territory of the Métis people. To kick things off today, I'd like to introduce the agenda for today's webinar, and we'll start by defining our learning objectives, a quick comparison of before and after generative AI and how it could potentially benefit your organization. We'll be talking about and working through a prompt example around crafting winning grants and how to use AI to accelerate that process. We'll then take a look at shareholder reporting and understanding how we can use AI to accelerate that process. Finally, doing a quick review of policy management and updates, probably everyone's favorite activity, followed by a quick look at the next level of AI, which is actually starting to introduce AI agents. AI agents we'll talk about in short order, but these are really going to be an embodiment of your team, empowering your organization to be more efficient and productive with your time. We'll take a look at 2 case studies for organizations we've had the privilege of working with so far. And finally, we'll wrap up today's session with a Q&A portion. To kick things off, I'd like to introduce the learning objectives for today's webinar. The first is going to be looking at prompt design and how do we effectively design prompts that are going to produce the results that we're looking for when working with generative AI tools such as ChatGPT or Claude. We're going to then look at how do we add key pieces of information that are going to give the appropriate context to guide the AI to act in a way that really embodies our organization, including maintaining that authentic brand voice and tone unique to your organization. Now, when we think about before generative AI and what that process looks like, we hear from organizations that we've worked with that there's a lot of searching for key statistics. We understand that there's going to be a process of going through a grant application or a report that needs to be written for shareholders and defining the key requirements, and then going through the effort of actually manually drafting that writing or that application, the report, and then going through the effort of aligning it with your brand voice and tone and any key statistics. Now, after we start to introduce generative AI into this process, we have a lot of the same experience, only it's more productive. We're now able to have key statistics, stats, as well as quotes pulled from key documents that have been written before by your organization. We're able to have those key requirements for our grant or our report summarized and provided to us so that we can ensure that we have a clear understanding as the end writer about how we're going to turn around and best position our organization for this grant application or the report that we need to produce. And finally, we're able to start to automate that first and second draft creation, enabling an organization such as yourself to then turn around and focus more on how do we align this and how do we ensure that we're putting out more applications than traditionally possible. One key piece that I would like to introduce, and this is a quote that we heard from the executive director at the Arts Council of Buffalo, was thinking about our grant funding application and how do we turn around and improve that pipeline so that we have more grant applications going out. Now, the next piece is going to be thinking about how we design our prompts for best outcomes. And so we're going to start the process by looking at prompt structure, which is going to have 8 key elements to it. The first is going to be around role and expertise. When we're working with large language models, we want them to embody a specific persona that we would like them to take on, as well as the level of expertise that we would like them to demonstrate. We want to provide clear instructions on the goal as well as the assignment that we would like them to complete, whether that be drafting a grant application or writing a shareholder report. We want to make sure that we're very clear about which piece is going to be important and defining what their assignment is going to look like. Excuse me. The next piece is thinking about the appropriate context that we need to provide, as well as any key information from your organization's guidelines and documents. We're then going to turn around and ensure that we align the large language model with the desired audience that we would like them to turn around and write for. So in the case of a grant application, this could be specifying who is the recipient of the application and who's going to be reviewing it, ensuring that we're using the appropriate tone, voice, and style of writing. The next piece is going to be thinking about constraints that we want to introduce. This may come in the form of do's and don'ts, or specific language that we want the large language model to stay away from when going through the process of producing the output. Now, specifying the output is going to be equally important. So we want to be very clear about how we ask the large language model to produce the output that we're looking for. In the examples we'll be working through today, you'll see where I've called that out specifically as part of our prompt structure. Now, thinking about large language models and how they behave, we really want to envision them as that eager intern that's just joined your organization. And in order to set them up for best success, we want to actually ask them to produce a task list that they can follow throughout the process to ensure that they are working through chronologically the steps that need to happen in order to produce the best outcomes. The last piece before we get started is we want to ask the large language model to actually ask us clarifying questions. And the reason here is there may be things that we haven't thought of, or maybe as part of our prompt, we weren't explicitly clear on one piece or another. And we're going to demonstrate this in just a moment in terms of the importance and the value that we get from asking clarifying questions of us. So to start things off, I wanted to introduce you. You've all been recruited today to join our fictitious non-for-profit Growing Greens Together. So for the purpose of today's demonstrations, we've created this fictitious organization. We've then used AI to create all of these different elements that you see here on screen, and we'll be applying to a grant based out of Edmonton, Alberta for community gardens. And we'll be looking at how do we potentially use this fictitious organization and the grant guidelines to produce the best possible grant outcome, as well as then write a shareholder report based on those outcomes before moving into policy updates. And in this case, we're going to be demonstrating a change to the number of directors on the board of directors for our fictitious organization. Any questions about this, please let me know just in the chat. I did want to call out that for all the prompts that we're going to be demonstrating today, we do have a guide that we will be providing to everyone. So please don't worry about taking screenshots or trying to write everything down. They are quite lengthy prompts, and we will be sending out all 3 prompts that we've demonstrated today right after this session. And so to kick things off, I'm just going to move over to Claude. And just to set expectations, the reason that we're demonstrating Claude today is there's been a lot of demos done with ChatGPT. It's very popular. We wanted to just introduce a new tool that could potentially, or that has the ability to produce the same outcomes. It's just a slightly different flavor and variety. So just to confirm, everyone can see my screen okay, just with a show of thumbs. Awesome, thank you. Appreciate that. And so wanted to first walk through our first prompt example here, and this is going to be looking at grant writing. And so what we've done here is in this first paragraph, we've set our assignment and our role and our expertise. as our expert grant writer specializing in nonprofit organizations. We've then turned around and provided it with the grant guidelines. And you can see all of these documents here are attached along the bottom, including our fictitious non-for-profits strategic plan for 2024 through 2027, our brand guidelines, as well as the grant program guide and the appropriate policy that's going to dictate and govern applications submitted for this grant. And so with that, we've then asked it to take on the assignment of writing a detailed task list and developing a polished set of grant responses. Now, the first piece was to have it go through, read, analyze, and make sure it understands the grant guidelines. And you can see that's been structured here. After studying those grant guidelines, we've asked it to produce a comprehensive summary back for us to be able to read and review, ensuring that we also agree with the understanding that it has as a large language model of the documents that have been provided, and then presenting that summary for clarity. We can then provide feedback or make any adjustments as appropriate before moving on to the next step, which is going to be having it review our strategic documents for our nonprofit organization. We'll have it go through the same process where it's going to analyze these documents thoroughly, paying attention specifically to our mission, our vision, our goals, and the existing programs that we've defined for our fictitious organization. Now, based on that outline, we see that it's then going to take and start the process of creating a task list for it to follow. And we've given it very clear tasks and an order of operations in which we want it to follow, including gathering any additional information and identifying appropriate supporting evidence. It's then going to go through and write out its task list and review and edit any tasks, as well as actually go through the document preparation, including formatting and assembling the required package or the attachments for the package. With that, we do want to have a timeline for completion of each task, which for the purpose of today, we'll be working through very quickly. And at this time, I did want to introduce, you are able to break this up, pause, come back to these conversations. So there isn't an expectation on you as a team member who would be using these tools to actually complete this all in one sitting. You do have the ability to start a grant application over lunch, take a couple days off, look for some key information that you may not have initially, and come back and then complete this as appropriate. Now, with that, the next piece here is going to be thinking about our presentation output, and we have very clear guidelines in terms of the format that we want it to produce. As mentioned, we do have these prompt guides for you, so please don't worry about trying to, understand what all the different bracket types are. This really helps the large language model understand in computer language what's going to be the most appropriate and the order of operations that we would like it to follow. Now, the last closing pieces here is that we want the ability to turn around and be thorough, professional, and strategic in our approach. And we're then going to give it the instructions to ask those clarifying questions before we begin to produce the best possible outcome. So just to go ahead and start, we'll kick things off here, and we'll have Claude go through and analyze the 4 documents that we've attached. So that's our strategic plan for the fictitious organization. That's our brand guidelines, as well as the grant application and the policy that governs that application. And so we see here that it comes back with a couple of clarifying questions. And so it then turns around and asks as the first question, is this organization actually registered as a community league under the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues? It specifies that this is recommended. And so we will turn around and say, for the purpose of the demo, community league. The second piece, and we just want to order or answer these questions in the order and the same format that they're presented to us. And we can do line breaks just by simply pressing and holding the shift button and then pressing enter. And so the second piece here is going to turn around and we're going to say, yes, we do, for the purpose of the demo. And we would then turn around and say, okay, so the application is good, or it has a specific deadline. This is passed, obviously. So we're going to turn around and say, that's okay. Please proceed for demonstration purposes. And so those are the three questions that it's asked of us as the individual working with the large language model. So we'll go ahead and hit enter at this time and allow those to move forward. And so we see here that we have a couple more questions that it's going to ask us. And at this point, we can say, okay, so let's just start to review what it's asked back to us. So we have our different funding streams that have been identified from our grant application. We're only able to apply for one project per year. The award sizes determine future eligibility with a minimum project cost, as well as our required documents. We have our deadline, as well as we now get into our organizational analysis for our fictitious non-for-profit organization called Growing Greens Together alignment, and it aligns that with the CLIP priorities. From there, we have an assessment of our key strengths for the application, as well as what are going to be the tasks that we need to complete as an individual for the purpose of demonstration. We then look at the research and documentation that it recommends, as well as the development of the application. And it's saying that we're going to take 5 to 7 weeks potentially to put all this together before getting into our review process and then thinking about our submission proposal, or excuse me, submission preparation. Now, I wanted to pause there just for a moment as we have a couple questions in the chats. Oh, I'm sorry. Perfect. Okay. Excellent. Sorry, I apologize, Luna. I'm not sure if there's anything I can do to help out on that. I'll speak a little bit louder just in case that helps. And so with that, we see that the next step would be then to, after we've reviewed this, we agree with it. And for the purposes of the demonstration today, we'll go ahead and say, great. And now I did want to set the expectation. Some folks have asked the question, why is it that you say please and thank you? I always try to think about the interactions that we want to have with the large language models and very much treating this like that junior intern that's joined the team or that new person to the organization, using please and thank you, providing words of encouragement. And this isn't just good practice from an ethical perspective, but it's actually been demonstrated through research activities to help improve the quality of the outputs. And so we'll say, great start. Please skip forward to drafting our first version using the information we have at hand. Now, for yourselves, we wouldn't necessarily want to skip through any of this. If there was anything that we were missing, we would have the opportunity now to look at this and go, okay, so I have the following pieces, but I'm going to need to track down or define a budget and what's going to be happening, as well as how do we plan on aligning or submitting this. So it gives us, as that individual working with a large language model, the opportunity to gather information, gather facts, talk to other members of our team, and put all of that together. Now, we see here that it has created the first draft of our grant application here on the right-hand side, and it actually completed that first draft in less time than I was able to explain things. I wanted to just set the expectation that this is all based off of fictitious documents that we created for the purpose of today's demonstration. So our strategic plan was quite small, only about 15 pages, and our brand guidelines were only 3. Thinking about how this is applicable to your organizations, we now think about the opportunity that exists within your strategic plans to be able to say, hey, you know what? Here is more information, more context. Here's previous projects that we've completed, or maybe we've kicked something off and we're applying for the second phase of funding. Here's everything that we completed in that first phase. That allows us to add more context, more information, and it's going to increase the level of personalization and the quality of information that's being provided to you. So with that, the next piece here is we can do a quick review and we can say, okay, so here's our project overview. Here's our project details, key information around infrastructure, as well as our community impact and alignment, and thinking about our level of product readiness or project readiness, excuse me, within our fictitious organization. We then have our sustainability plan defined so that we have a clear understanding of, once we've started this initiative, how do we plan on continuing this, as well as thinking about risks that have been identified and ultimately evaluating or using an evaluation framework to understand what are going to be the metrics that we're going to use to measure success of this initiative. We do have a draft budget summary that the team could then take and finesse as appropriate, specific to your application, and then defining any key expenses that are going to be associated with that. Now, if we like this, but it wasn't really what we were looking for, it's a good first draft. We've found additional information that we'd like to use or add into our application. We can then say, great start. Please critique and refine your work. Provide a more comprehensive introduction and details for each section. And so this allows us, and as professional writers, you're going to have a clear understanding of where specifically you would like the project to improve. And you can provide that feedback to the large language model very much in the same way that you would if you were working with a live person. So we can say, hey, you know what, these areas are very good. However, there's an opportunity to improve here, here, and here. And as we can see, it's actually going through and it's quickly writing all of that out for us so that we have the opportunity to work through that second level of, or that second draft, excuse me. So just to take a quick look at that, we have now our second draft of the application, a bit more of an expanded executive summary, a clear understanding of our project snapshot, demonstrated need within the community, as well as the current infrastructure gaps, our project components. Then we think about our alignment with city priorities specifically for this application. And then we look at what is our implementation plan. Now, as writers, as grant developers, as members of an organization that's going to be going through this process, there may be pieces that you say, hey, you know what, I really don't like the way that we've structured the implementation plan. And we can actually just provide that feedback to the large language model that we're using or working with, whether that be Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, whichever one you prefer. And you're able to actually go through a very iterative process to then have it produce an output that is very much aligned with your end desired state, ultimately with a goal of having this report, or excuse me, this application produced very quickly and ready for submission. Now, just out of respect for time, we're going to move on and we're going to move to the second part of today's demonstration, and that's thinking about shareholder reporting. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide the prompt that this is great. We're going to, for the purpose of the demo, continue on, and we'll move into shareholder reporting. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and paste our grant applicator, or excuse me, our report writing prompt in here. And so just as a call out, we will be providing this prompt as well for everyone. So just to quickly introduce and walk through it, we see here that we've set the expectation. We want the large language model to now act as that expert report writer with the key task of drafting key reports. We then have the key guidelines that we've provided, including those grant guidelines. So we're continuing this chat. And I did want to call out, this is a very powerful part of working with large language models. Let's say we've gone through and crafted this grant, we've submitted it, many months has gone by, and we're now ready to go ahead and write the report. As long as we still have access to that large language model and the chat, we can just pick up where we left off by posting this appropriate prompt in here. And we see here that we've given it the grant guidelines, we've summarized the strategy plan and ensuring that we're aligned with it, as well as reviewing the critical outcomes. And then based on that information, let's turn around and showcase this information in our report, listing these outcomes in that essential outcomes format. From there, we're going to ask the writer or the participant or the individual working with the large language model any questions, as we want to make sure this is relevant to our audience and who's going to potentially be reading it. We're then going to have it go through that process of creating its task list to guide itself as it goes through the report writing process. And then finally, drafting that report and asking any clarifying questions about the organization's outcomes, the work that has been completed, or the requirements of the grant itself. And so I'll go ahead and enter that prompt. And just while I do, I'm just going to check the chat. I see we've got a couple of questions come up. Exactly. That's it, Matt. You've got it. And so just while we do that, we see here that it's going to then go through and identify our essential outcomes. And so it's fictitiously for our organization. We're on a time warp today. So in the time that it's taken us to talk about this, we've completed that 2,000 square foot garden. We've got our accessible raised beds built. We've also put together our educational pavilion storage facility, and we have our community impact defined. So as we come down to the bottom, we see the different sections and the timelines produced. Now we're going to turn around and ask it to operate based on those assumed preferences, as well as our fictitious information that we've provided. And so we say, great work. And this time we'll actually change it up. We'll say great start, just so that it understands this is that first step. We're then, please operate. Now, of course, as individuals using this tool set, you would want to make sure that you have the opportunity to go through, gather all of this information, and provide that context by attaching files. The best file format to do that with is actually using PDF format. That allows these different large language models to go through and extract that information. But we'll see here that we have the first draft of our report coming into play. And so this is a good start. It gives us, again, I wouldn't say an overly descriptive level of detail. However, we do understand here are the different pieces that are going to be important for our organization to report on. So we look down the list and we go, okay, it's not bad. It's a good starting point. But let's go ahead and encourage it to then continue on. So we say good start. Again, with that, please critique and refine your own work. The audience, as it's a little bit bland and generic still, is the reviewing committee. And so just giving it that additional context that, hey, the audience for this report is actually going to be the reviewing committee, and we'd like to provide a higher level of detail. And so it's going to go through, and it's actually working through the critique right now. And so we see here, just before it continues on, that it actually identifies and lists out for us as that participant what are going to be the areas of information that it can actually improve. And as the user or the leader, the individual working with the large language model, you can then identify and say, okay, this is good, but actually, you know what? I think what we're missing here is let's strengthen our executive summary. So we'll say good progress, but our executive summary still needs more description and detail. We want to strengthen the story of success throughout the report. And you can think about the ways that you would go about writing, the coaching you would provide to yourself as the individual crafting that report. And we can now start to use that to influence how would we coach the LLM or the large language model, excuse me, so that it's producing the output and the report in the tone that we would like. Also thinking about our brand and voice, excuse me, the brand and voice for our organization. That information could be referenced. We could say, hey, you know what, this is good, but the report you've currently produced is lacking in terms of our actual authentic voice or tone. And so we could provide that feedback, and let's see what that looks like. Great progress. Just one second here. And so we've now produced our third draft. And so we can see here that it's going to take that brand, voice, and tone, and it's going to weave that into our final report. So let's take a quick look and see what that looks like real quick in terms of our final draft and whether this is something that we would actually want to use. And so we have that stronger opening statement around what is it that we've looked to accomplish, our impact at a glance in terms of the key outcomes that we've specified for our fictitious organization, as well as the story behind the numbers. And this is starting to think about more of that emotional narrative that we want to turn around and communicate or convey as we turn around and work through our report writing process. Now, we see here that we still have our innovation in action, as well as some of our key statistics. Please keep in mind the large language model did fabricate all of this information in just as part of the demonstration purpose. However, when we get to writing an actual report, we would have the ability to use this information based on the context that you've provided in whatever form those documents may exist. And thinking about best practice for how do we communicate that information to a large language model, the easiest way is to copy and paste all of that into a Word document or a spreadsheet, download that as a PDF, and then attach it. And we would just provide guidance in terms of what are those documents that we're attaching and how we would like it to turn around and polish its outcomes. So we see here that it does include our financial statistics, including an ROI for the project costs and what was implemented, as well as our sustainability metrics, a commitment to our environmental leadership, a look at our resource optimization, and we've even included, though a bit fictitious, some of those community voice quotes that would be key and important to producing a very meaningful report for our funders. Now, looking forward, we also don't want to forget about thinking about what are the next steps so that our grant assignees understand that this is not going to be just a one and done opportunity. This is an initiative that we're going to be supporting on an ongoing basis moving forward with our conclusion, as well as some awards that were fictitiously granted to us. So I wanted to pause there. We've gone through now our grant writing process as well as our shareholder reporting process. I'm going to switch gears and actually be using ChatGPT for the purpose of our policy updates. And so just to confirm that you can see my screen okay, just by a show of thumbs. Awesome, thank you. And so using that same fictitious organization, Growing Greens Together, we've created a set of organizational policies. And just to introduce the prompt, this will also be included in the prompt guide that we'll be distributing after today's webinar. We're looking at, first and foremost, the assignment that we want it to take on with a very clear goal and the expertise that we need it to embody. So in this case, it's an AI assistant. We're then going to give it a very structured set of task lists, or excuse me, a task list that we would like it to follow. And so that first piece is going to be providing it with the organizational document, and then enclosing that information so that it goes through and it actually reads and summarizes that information, including a concise summary of the main points and key policies within said document. The third piece is going to be asking us as the individual working with the large language model, which specific policy needs updating, including any response in the following formats. And please keep in mind, all of this is really structured to best guide the large language model in terms of documents that you attach. And so it'll ask us the question specifically, which policy would you like to update today? Now, once we have a clear understanding of the policy that needs to be updated, it's going to then request any necessary information to make that update. And we'll then have it turn around and draft that first round of revisions before finally providing a brief statement acknowledging the update request, allowing us to quickly communicate that to various audiences, including our shareholders, any community members, and our funders that may have a need to understand this information as well. And so we see here that it's produced a task list for it to follow. It's going to work through these chronologically, first, second, and third. And then it's going to then give us a confirmation statement. We've set the constraints as well as the specified outcome that we want it to be very thorough, professional, and attentive throughout this process, ensuring that it's asking any clarifying questions before we begin. So just to go ahead and kick things off, I'll go ahead and enter that prompt. We'll allow it to do its thing. It's going to quickly read the documents. I'm just going to check the messages real quick. Great question, Eugene. So yes, so the brand documents are attached, and we do have it configured for the demo, as Brian had mentioned. In the case that you would be looking to adopt this for your organization, that would be something that you would ask it, or you would attach and provide to it through any existing documentation you have, and that can be accomplished just by attaching it as a PDF. We will come back to that question in just a moment to show you also the capabilities of an agent and how you can actually have one pre-trained for your organization so you don't have to go through this process every time. So we see here that it's given us a our summary of the different organizational policies for our fictitious organization, Rowing Greens Together. And so it includes the 8 different sections. And so in this case, we're going to say we would like to update number of directors sit on the board of directors for our organization. We will be reducing from 9 to 5. And so we'll give it that guidance, and it'll then go ahead and produce the policy to update. And we see here that we have specifically the policy it's going to reference from the list that it's created above. And then we're going to turn around and it's going to ask us, for additional details or preferences for implementing this change, such as the existing term lengths, or if those are going to remain the same. Will there be any change to the expertise mix that we're looking to have as part of our board of directors? Is there any specific guidelines that should be included as part of that reduction? And then thinking about the quorum results and if there's any adjustments that need in alignment with the smaller board size. So for the purpose of today's demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and quickly answer these. Remain the same. No changes. Specific guidelines. So we're going to say, nope, no changes here. And finally, the quorum results. Nope, this is also the same. Potential for future updates. So we'll go ahead and let that draft for just a second here. And while we do that, I'm just going to check the chat. Perfect. And so we see here that that key information that we've provided is now stored. And so it's going to go ahead and work through a task list for itself. And the first step being the review of the current policy, updating the policy text, and then working down the list as it goes. And so we're then going to have, including our transition plan. So we can go ahead and say, great start. Please proceed with the changes. And so it's going to go ahead and take care of that. And we see here that we have our first draft of the updated policy, including a change log and then we have the task list that it's going to work through. Now, just while it does that, I'm going to say as a pre-prompt, great progress. The shareholders to communicate this policy change. We need to notify our board of directors, funders, and the general public. These create 3 drafts of our communication tailored to the specific audiences. And so we'll go ahead and let that draft for just a moment. And so for our first draft, that produces specifically for our board of directors, letting them know the rationale behind the change. We then have the key details included in that information. We have our notification for funders. Again, with that key information, though a slightly different tone of voice and level of information that's being provided. And of course, our third announcement is for the general public. Now, thinking about our ability to interact or tailor these different communications, we could come back to our draft 1 here and we could say, good progress. However, we need more detail. We need to provide more guidance, more information specifically for our board of directors, as well as the rationale behind how we've reached this decision. That level of detail could be provided to our funders as well. And if we wanted to tone down the level of information that we're providing to the general public, we could provide that guidance and that feedback as well. Now, just thinking about time, I do want to just demonstrate one last piece and talk about the AI agents. And so thinking about how this becomes a lot of manual work still for yourself as that grant writer, report writer, how do we turn around and take and upskill that information? And the answer there is AI agents. And so working in collaboration with the Arts Council of Wood Buffalo, we do have a demonstration that I wanted to just quickly show you. And what we've done is we've pre-trained an AI agent on all of the key information. We've removed the need for the Arts Council team to actually go through and design prompts or attach additional context. And we've brought all that together under one simple button, allowing their team to click, let's get started. It will then go through and work off of the trained knowledge that it's been using. And so this includes the strategic goals, the RFP criteria for the RFP that it's going to create or going to apply to. And we see here that it's going to define the process that it's going to follow, including the grant writing framework. It also has an evaluation framework to be able to score and ensure alignment for different pieces of that grant application. And so the intent here was very much to remove the need for the Arts Council team when working with an AI, in this case, the AI agent that's been named Sam Grant, to be able to move through very quickly without having to track down this information. It's now pre-trained on specifically the Arts Council, Wood Buffalo, as well as the region of Wood Buffalo municipality for Fort McMurray, and the key strategic plan for that city. And so we see here the expectations and needs. It's going to ask specifically for the inputs in terms of confirming priority for the proposal, as well as key metrics and goals. Now it's going to have some initial questions for us, but it allows us to remove that entire process around prompt design. And very quickly, now Sam Grant is trained on the organization. There's not a need for you to provide that information every time. Just coming back to the presentation, I wanted to talk quickly through 2 case studies before we move into the question and answer period. And the first one is for Paul First Nation, located in central Alberta. Paul First Nation retained us earlier this year to turn around and work with them to define and develop an AI agent specifically for the purpose of grant and report writing. As part of that, we also built a function that allows them to search for grants specifically for Indigenous communities to be able to apply to different funding streams. And we've seen the number of grants discovered that they're eligible to apply for jump by 40% this year versus last year. We've seen an efficiency boost by their team of 55%. This was self-declared, and they really estimate that by using the AI agent that was developed specifically for their nation, they've seen almost double the number of applications go out this year, resulting in over $1 million in funding secured to date. They do have a number of applications that are still in the review process, and we won't know about those until later or earlier next year, excuse me. The second case study that we'd like to showcase really quickly is for the Arts Council with Buffalo. And so a similar efficiency boost of about 50%. The team finds themselves loving the tool, though there is also a decrease in the skepticism of AI, as some of the feedback we heard initially from the executive director at the Arts Council was that when using ChatGPT, the outputs were very bland and generic, and by going through the process of training an AI agent on their unique brand, voice, and tone, they actually feel much more confident as a team in terms of the usage of these tools to produce meaningful outputs that they feel confident in submitting. This has resulted in over $8 million in funding applied to date. So I'd like to open the floor up now at this time for questions. I don't see any in the chat, but we'll happily open the floor up for anyone who'd like to come off mute, or if you'd like to post your questions in the chat, please feel free. And we'll use the rest of this time today just for Q&A. And I also wanted to share that we have an upcoming workshop that'll be happening in person in the Fort McMurray area in early 2025. Open floor today. Is there any questions, comments, concerns? We'd love to hear from everyone in terms of your thoughts. Is this something that you would be interested in? Or is this something you're already using?
I would just add a comment here. I had no idea how complex you could make those prompts, or how important it was to make them so complex. Uh, can you briefly talk about some of the different pieces, or will that be in the guide that you hand out later on some of that bracketing, some of those important steps that really drove home what made the prompt the most useful?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Eugene. Thank you. So let me just go ahead and quickly pull up the prompt guideline for everyone, just so we can look at one of those prompt guides in person, or excuse me, as we follow along here. And so the first one we'll look at is for the grant writing. Let me just go ahead and bring up my screen. And if you wouldn't mind confirming for me when you can see, just to confirm sizing is okay for everybody. Okay, awesome. And so the way that this has been structured, and it's to answer the first part of your question there, Eugene, it's absolutely very important that we're providing as much detail and as much context as possible when we're working through those grants. This is almost a full page, or excuse me, it is a full page of text that was used to turn around and develop that initial grant around grant writing. And so the different bracket styles actually help the large language model of choice in the same way that it would read markdown language. We wanted to provide it with the guidance that it understands there are going to be different attachments. So when you have a chance to use this prompt, the key piece for yourselves as an organization is going to be attaching those key documents, and it will understand when it sees the different squiggly brackets here. Those are going to be attached, and you can even reference or just quickly add in there grant guidelines attached. The next piece would be thinking about your strategic documents as an organization and the importance of adding those for context so that it understands your brand, voice, and tone, as well as your strategic goals and the initiatives that you as an organization seek to accomplish. Now, when we see the triangle brackets here, I forget the exact name for them, but the Pac-Man figures, we have the ability to then use that to break up the prompt so that it's reading through this as a large language model and it understands the first part that we want it to accomplish is the grant guidelines. Second part we want it to accomplish is to read through the strategic documents. And then once it's reviewed those and it's added those to its memory for context, we'll then have it go through and start to work on, we'll then have it go through and start to work on the task list that we've provided it. Now we see here that once that grant analysis is finished, It's going to provide a summary of the grant application requirements, and then it's going to move into the process of starting to draft it. Now, if at any point, Eugene, yourself and your team had, a start of a grant application already drafted, and you wanted to use a large language model to accelerate that process, you could even attach that draft as part of the app or as part of the process as well. Just wanted to confirm that I answered all of your questions there.
I think so. Brain's a
Awesome.
bit full, but
No, I appreciate it. Chase,
Yes, I have a question.
please.
So you used Claude for the first half of the demonstration, then you switched to ChatGPT. I'm just curious, like what are the differences between the two models and like why use Claude over ChatGPT or vice versa? Yeah.
Great question. I would offer it actually all comes down to personal preference. The part of the reason I wanted to demonstrate with both tools today was to show the capabilities and the similarities between both tools, and ultimately it's going to come down to the information that we're providing as the individual working with the tool on the front end. That's going to guide the quality of the output more so than a specific tool such as ChatGPT or Claude. And ultimately, we could even use something like Grok from XAI or Gronk, excuse me, as well as Gemini. And so really the flexibility here is for yourself as the individual working with these tools. It's thinking about how do we provide it with the most context and guidance on the front end so that it produces the most meaningful outputs on the back end. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a great question. Any other questions from the participants today? Okay, excellent. Well, as we draw close to the end of the hour here, I wanted to thank everyone for your time today. It's greatly appreciated. I love the questions. I really appreciate the dialogue in the chat. And we will be sending out a copy of the recording, the prompt guide, as well as the presentation deck in case there's any of this information that you'd like to use. And Matt, I see there was a question just in the chat. These currently, we are using the paid subscriptions for both ChatGPT and Claude. We did build the AI agent for the Arts Council Wood Buffalo based off of that paid subscription for ChatGPT, which runs them currently a cost of 2 licenses, and that gives them access to the Teams license so that they have a little bit more flexibility and prompt capability in terms of the amount of context information that they can add. However, we do encourage everyone, just as an experimental start, to turn around and start with just a free version. You'll actually, using these prompts, be able to produce quite meaningful outputs, though what you'll quickly find is you'll run into a context limit in which ChatGPT or Claude will tell you, hey, thanks so much for trying. Now we'd like you to pay for a license. So there is a barrier that you'll run into. Ultimately, the goal is to enable you to be in a position that you can try and then make a decision about what's best for yourself and your organization. One other consideration I just wanted to call out today, and this is around privacy, just as a closing note, please do consider that information that you put into any of these large language models through a chat interface is going to be used by that large language model to train their existing model on information provided. So in the case of, say, any proprietary information or anything that's confidential, you do want to be mindful that that information will end up within that large language model. One of the reasons that Arts Council with Buffalo, as well as Paul First Nation, opted to go the route of a custom AI agent being developed for them was it empowered them to turn around and have complete control over the information they provided so that it was protected and it was not used to train the model. So that was another one of the benefits of using an AI agent versus using just a chat interface. If you have any other questions, I do want to be mindful and respectful of your time, so we will wrap today for now. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Even if it's just for a chat, we would love to continue the conversation, and please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. We're working as much as possible to share as much of this information publicly on a regular basis. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. All the very best.